worst protagonist? Or is it just a postmodern analysis? Indie Alpaca's gonna help us out talking about Y2K, or maybe it's pronounced YIIK.
I'm here with the Indie Alpaca, and I've never seen anyone quite like you before, Indie Alpaca. Do you prefer to be called Indie Alpaca, or is it always the full name, Indie Alpaca?
It's just indie. Yeah, part of the origin is like number one. I'll go into the origin of my name later. Like, let's talk YIIK first.
Sure, YIIK, also known as Y2K, a postmodern RPG? Not the
That's correct.
postmodern. They were very humble in that they used A, implying that there's more postmodern RPGs. And now it's been re-released as Y2K IV, which also stands for like version 1.5, if I remember correctly. And it's been totally changed. And while the changes have, I think, been made to meet the criticism where it was at, the good faith criticism of the original version of the game, and try to rectify some of the issues people had with it. It also, in my opinion, is really staying true to itself, which I was very, very happy to see. Sometimes you see apology patches for games that like change the core of it. And if anything, they went deeper into what I originally was drawn to the game for. And I started talking to the developers of the game, Brian and Andrew Allenson. I want to say like 2012 is when we talked about this game first. They had come off the creation of another game called Two Brothers that is referenced in Y2K a couple of times. And this was like their ability to take their success from Two Brothers and bring it to the next level. That's just a little warm up for people about Y2K. But you, Indy, are, in my opinion, a true fan and true expert on Y2K. So I wanted to take it over to you and ask you what drew you to the game in the first place, and what do you like about it now?
What can I say? I'm a true YIIK head. So I actually was drawn to Y2K by a YouTube video by Jack Saint, if you're familiar with that one.
Mm.
Um, it was incredibly negative. It was saying like, "Oh yeah, I went into this with a fair shot," and then like he spends the entire time just tearing down the game, calling it the worst game he's ever played. And I was like, "Wow, this seems like an interesting time. I want to see for myself."
Hmm.
And so I played it and I actually streamed it. And the entire time I was like, no, actually, I'm kind of enjoying this.
Mm.
So what initially drew me to it was just like the negative feedback around it, where people were saying it was like the worst game they ever played. And I was playing confused. I was like, I think I'm actually really liking this.
Mm.
But
And tell me, do you remember around what year that was? Had the game just come out, or do you think it was had been out for a few years? Or there was even that phase, I think, where it was in beta, where people were giving it a shot and really being negative about it. I wrote for Destructoid.com at that time, and I think I was the editor in chief. It's 2014, and I assigned the game to one of our best writers, Brittany Vincent, and she loves good video games. She's got great taste, and she's also a great writer. And she really wanted to like it and played it, and we're just like, I hate the main character so much. Like, I think the graphics are good to, at the very least interesting, at best, like very good. The character designs are great, the music's good. The general concept of doing turn-based battles, except there's a fun like minigame gimmick to each weapon, and they're all modern weapons like a record player or a camera and stuff like that. It was an interesting concept, and it had the potential to get good. But her, if I remember correctly, her hatred of Alex was enough to just be like, I can't stand it. And that's, I think, why the game became so notorious, because Alex represents a side of gaming that was rising through the 2010s. And it's a side that people didn't expect to see, where video games were considered almost culture and like hipster. Like, people who were talking about games seem to be attracted to the idea of elevating their intellectual status by saying, I play such and such game. Like, this didn't happen when I was growing up. I'm a little older than you, I think. No one was like bragging about being cultured because they played Donkey Kong Country. Like, it just wasn't part of the conversation. But it's been happening lately, and people have a real ire, a real hatred for these video game hipsters. And he just represented that to people in a way that I don't know if the Allenson brothers, the creators of the game, intended it, but it really changed the conversation about the game in a way that I don't think people expected. So that was my experience with it coming up. Did you, when you played the game, did you immediately hate Alex as well?
So it's not that I hated Alex. It's more of it's difficult to describe how I feel about the game's narrative
Mm.
because a lot of people hate Alex for his constant monologuing, but it's one of those things that pays off really well at the end of the game.
Mm.
And because people are turned off by the constant monologuing, they never get that payoff.
Mm.
But it's one of those things where, like, in the moment, you're like, this is dumb. Why is he monologuing? But then there are like a couple of like nuggets that are like, wait a second, there's a reason he's doing this to the point where you reach the end of the game. You're like, oh, that's why he's been narrating everything, which is something that they address a little bit better in 1.5. Let me know if I'm getting
Mm.
ahead of us, but
Sure, sure.
instead of it constantly being almost visually novelly where a character is standing in place with text box talking, they've changed it so it's like him almost at a stand-up club narrating to someone. And I think that the change in pace to differentiate the game space and the narration space really helps with that.
So well put.
But
You're so good at talking about these video games, Indy.
thank you. I just really like this game. Um,
Yeah, I want to hear what you like about it. So it's sounding like the decision to make it very intentional and almost make fun of Alex when he starts narrating. Like the game isn't like pointing and laughing at him, but it is self-parody. And it reminded me a little bit of, it's a very old movie. You probably haven't seen it, Top Secret. It's a movie by the Zucker brothers who created Airplane. It was like not one of their more popular movies. It stars Val Kilmer and is completely straight-faced about the most absurd stuff happening. And likewise, Alex is totally straight-faced at the microphone, being like, I couldn't believe the look in her eyes. She was thinking of me, I'm sure of it. And it's like this guy thinks he is so important, but that's the joke. The game is giving him a stage to, in a way, make fun of people who think they're really important because they're just twisting it enough to make it absurd that he, in the middle of a big story and other people's lives, he's just 100% making it about him for a little bit. And it's making fun of people who do that, I think. And I think the Allenson brothers, as I know them a little, I haven't talked to them in 8 years or so, but last time I talked to them, they were aware that they also like make things about themselves and their big ideas, and they wanted to make fun of themselves a little bit for being like that because they know it's absurd. They know life is much bigger and more important than a video game that they've been working on because it makes them laugh for the past decade or whatever. But they also really love their ideas and are sincere at the same time. So that mix of making fun of yourself and making fun of self-important people and also being sincere, I think has been really confusing to a lot of people.
yeah, and I think that's actually what drew me to the game or what made me like it initially. For a little bit of context, I think that I picked it up right around one of the earlier patches where they added a mechanic called time stop where you were able to make battles a little easier. So
Mm.
that's when I jumped in. So I didn't have the initial difficulty of battles. I actually cheesed a lot of the battles, kind of getting rid of the whole RPG element of a postmodern RPG. But I think what I love about Y2K is how genuine it is in some places.
Mm.
It feels like the Allensons are really trying to tell a story. And I think it's one of those games that has made me more mad than any video game because it had so much potential, but then there are moments where it just like pulls me out.
Mm.
Like, for example, because I was getting so good at the game, I was actually defeating bosses that weren't intended to be beaten. So I would get
Wow.
them down to 1 HP, the boss wouldn't die, and then I just have to sit there and wait for the boss to whale me down to 1 HP so the story could progress.
Oh, right, right, right. So it's like the illusion of a battle, but it's actually a story beat where you have to lose. That's interesting. I don't know as much about the game as I would like to. I certainly have opinions about it, and it seems like that is often the case that people have tons of opinions about it, but haven't actually beaten the whole game. I've played it to the degree where I feel comfortable talking about it, but I don't know if there are multiple endings, and I've researched this to a degree. I read a blog, a essay about the game that described a game I hadn't played at all, where Alex didn't have a beard and like Michael, who's one of the main characters, had a completely different shirt. And I'm like, I didn't play this game. Did I do something wrong? And the way they described that, they said you get a game in the game called Y2K and play it at Alex's house and have like a completely different experience. I rebooted my game from an earlier save. I tried to find what they were talking about. You have to buy that game in the game like at the very start. And now I'm wondering if I just got trolled because that's kind of the Y2K spirit, is to make you believe something that you read on the internet that may or may not be true. So, do you know anything about that? Or am I just talking bizarre, unrealistic, uh, abstract nonsense at you?
So there's a nugget of truth in there. I have never heard of this thing of a meta game within the game, but there's some stuff in Y2K 1.5 that I do not want to spoil for any listeners
Hmm.
because um let's just say that in some sections there's so much new content in this game that you could call it a new game entirely.
Yeah.
But um a game within a game, when was this like?
I know, right? I'll send you. I should have prepared and sent it to you earlier. I think this was written, I want to say 2 years ago. So the thing about Y2K that frustrates me and confuses me, but also intrigues me, is it has been through so many iterations and you can't go back. Like, I'll read about what Y2K was like between beta when I first played it and now. I played it off and on in between, but I never beat it in the middle. So all these complaints people have about like the battles going on too long and the mini games get boring, like I didn't even experience that from beginning to end. And now I'm playing Y2K IV, and the battle system of old is gone. Like it is now a cards based, but the cards rip and the characters start bleeding almost immediately. And the bleeding is like a countdown to your death. So there's no way for most fights against smaller enemies to go on forever and ever because everyone's bleeding. So like they listened to the fan feedback about battles taking too long and made it so, if anything, you're like desperate for them to go a little longer before you bleed out. And I am so impressed with the creative confidence it took to drastically change that game. And I'm also like want to be able to play the old version of it too. Like I would buy both versions if I could, but at least on the Switch where I played it, you can't. It's you buy Y2K and you press update, and now you've got the IV version, and the old one is lost forever. Like you truly can't dial back the clock and change history or change what you have now. It's been permanently altered by the passage of time, which kind of ties into the narrative of the game too. I feel like the experience of the game and the updates of the game almost tie into the narrative themes and overall message of the game itself. Like it's the story of its development and its changes through updates is almost like a secondary narrative to the actual game.
All right, so I've got a lot to talk about first. Number
That's
one
great.
is that as a fun little unlockable, after you beat the game in 1.5, you actually unlock the old combat system. So you
Oh
can
wow.
play, yes, you can play with the old combat system if you want to.
Cool.
So, but I love the new Carta system so much. It's so deep, and once like it took me a couple hours to actually grasp it. But once I understood, I was like, oh, this is actually super fun and actually requires strategy instead of just like pummeling enemies with
Mini games.
just like mini games.
Yeah.
Um, I would even say that the Carta system streamlined the game so much that they added an incredible new amount of content to 1.5 just like in the base game alone.
Mhm.
But because they streamlined the battle system so much, it's still 20 hours long.
Right.
So I would say that they've added I don't know. I'm like, shoot, I'm trying to think of how much content would have been added in the main game. But they've added essentially like a second campaign that's like interspersed between the main campaign,
Mhm.
and the game is still the same length. They managed to shave that much time off just through the battle system alone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that main campaign is now where it starts. It no longer starts just with Alex. So if people are like, I hated Alex so much, I know you're telling me he's funny and it's intentional to make him unlikable. But some people are just going to hear this and be like, I can't stand his face and I won't play it. You should know that there's a new lead-ish character that starts the game, and also that whole campaign keeps coming back and it subverts the main campaign in a lot of ways and does something that I really love about the update, which is the initial version of the game was conflicted between making fun of itself and being sincere. And also, I think it was conflicted between like, are we going to be cute and quirky and sort of silly about this, or are we going to go deep, disturbing, weird? And the new content is like, we're not going to try to hide behind cuteness and comedy anymore. We're going to tell you that we feel real bad. These Ellenson brothers, I think, have been really tortured by the process of releasing Y2K. I talked to them over Twitter when the real vitriol, the hatred towards them was bizarre. I want to say it was like 2015, maybe. People were calling them like racist and exploitive and like evil people. People were making up lies about them left and right. They were saying that Alex was them. Like they found a picture of a guy that looked like Alex and were like, this is the creator of this game. And he just put himself in there. These pompous, intellectual indie game developers. We hate them all, and they were just like, what? And I asked them at that time, so you got paid, right? Like, you've been working on this game forever. Didn't bomb, did it? They're like, no, we sold tons of copies. Like, they didn't sell millions in the first couple of months, but they sold enough to make their money back pretty quickly. So all of the negative talk about it got them sales in the end because people like yourself were curious about, well, why was this game, about out of all the games that are released every year, there's tons of actually bad games, but nobody bothers talking about them because it's boring to just say, yeah, the game's badly made. There was something about this game where the craft work behind it, the graphics, the character design, almost universally praised for their quality, even if you don't like the style of the characters. But then there's other things about it that just made people feel annoyed, like they were hanging out with somebody they didn't like Alex. And this new version of the game just dives deep into sincere, feel bad surrealism in a way that I'm really, really impressed with. Like I feel like the years of anguish that they've had in getting this game to where they want it to be gave them, I feel, also the confidence to make it truly unabsorbable to a lot of people. Like 90% of people, I think, are going to play the new story content and be like, this doesn't make any sense. I have no idea what's going on here. And those 10% who enjoy it are going to love it. And I'm hoping that the game does end up getting re-reviewed and rescored and reinterpreted by those people who are really going to get it. And now, if you don't get it, you're going to stop playing after 5 minutes. So that's the other thing. The other version of the game led people to think, well, maybe this is going to be like a Mario RPG, like comedy, cute game eventually. Now there's no illusions. If you play through that first segment with the new lead character, you know what you're going to get, and it's not like a cute romp. It is a real exploration of how bad and confusing life can be.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I thought that the original way of like dropping you into sort of an Earthbound style world made you like it's sort of like got your guard down, and then as
Mhm.
things started getting weird, it like gradually ramped up. But I think that's the thing, is that people fell off because they took Alex at face value. So the transition of starting the game in a much more surreal, confusing place really sets the tone of like what the later game is like. And I think that was honestly a really smart play because it's going to get in those people who love those like scary, surreal things like mouth washing, for example, you know?
Mm. hmm Yeah, a great
So
example of a recent one. Yeah.
yeah, so I feel like it opens it up to people who are more interested in like lore and scary stuff, right? Um, and when you were talking about people who love diving deep into that, oh my goodness, the Y2K Discord, which I frequent just because like there are so many interesting theories because there's so much that is unexplained, but there's is there, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Gosh, there's like so much that you've mentioned that I just want to like rewind to. First I
Sorry.
want to talk about the controversy around the elevator girl.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so a lot of the hatred for Y2K comes from basing it off like basing Semi-Pac's disappearance off the real life disappearance of I believe it was Alyssa Lamb.
hmm
Um, how she was taken from this elevator and found dead later. Some people said it was distasteful to make a main character of a video game be based on a real life person,
Mm.
but I think that the best fiction comes from places of real life. And I think Andrew said that part of Y2K was his like inspired by his obsession with her disappearance
Mm.
and the horrible culture that comes from like people obsessing over something like this. Um, I am not proud to say this, but I used to be in like circles like that where we would obsess over like internet personalities and come up with theories and things like that. And Onism, the in-game message board, is a very good version of that. Like it just shows what it's like for people on an online forum, just showing the worst of the worst, you know, what people can do when they're behind an anonymous identity.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much about this game that I think people don't like because it reminds them of things they don't like about themselves a little bit too much. And I don't want to like judge or hate people, especially Alex is annoying at times. And like you said, he and Michael are a part of this Onism online chat group that like is fascinated with real tragedy. But compared to, Travis Touchdown, who is like a
Mm-hmm.
cool nerd too, but just murders people, like Alex isn't quite as bad. Like people hate the Scott Pilgrims and the Alex Yicks. I know that's not his real last name, but that's how the internet seems to know him. Because they're a little bit too much like parts of ourselves we don't like. None of us, most of us aren't actual murderers. So when we play a video game about like truly evil people, it's kind of distanced and we can say, "Oh, it's fun to do this because it's totally fake." But Alex is pretty close to what a lot of real folks are like, and we're not always at our best. And if you play the game, as you're saying, you may see Alex come to terms with that actual conflict, and it's a real character growth moment. Like the writing is pretty great. I love a lot of games about nerds, and sometimes they just kind of get away without any character development. But this one, he actually has to face some of his less great traits.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we talk about your incredible visual appearance on this show and where it came from.
Oh, so I've been a Y2K fan for a while, and I think it was earlier this year, Brian Allenson, one of the modeler or the artist behind Y2K, was open for commissions, and I was like, I want you to make my character in the Y2K style, and I think he did an amazing job of it. Like, it's very cool to get art from a creator whose art you admire so much, right?
Yeah, and you look. I wish they would just put you in the game. They put Matt Hawkins in the game, who
Yes.
is a really interesting person. I've known him just parasocially through we've engaged on Twitter. Really, really angry about how game journalism turned out because he would took game journalism incredibly seriously, and then he saw it turn into tabloid stuff from as far as he could see, because there just hasn't been an audience really for serious, hard-hitting like New York Times style game journalism. And now in 2024, almost 25, even that like mild game journalism is totally paled in popularity to just people playing video games and making jokes. Like people don't want thought in a lot of their game content. But you, indie, people should know. Yeah, it's perfect for you to have a Y2K based avatar, which you turn on now and again because you're very thoughtful and willing to get honest with yourself about what you're doing and the games you're playing and really give it a honest journalistic bent if you ask me. I don't know if you know if I don't know if you think of yourself as a journalist, but I think the way you explore games certainly qualifies.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I try to find the good in every game, and a lot of it is you just have to make sure that you're not allowing yourself to just like take the opinions of someone else before you engage with something, you know?
Mm, hmm. Yeah, I think that is one of the things that's missing from games a lot of the time, and it's certainly an aspect of good journalism is to not just follow the crowd and say what you think people want to hear, and instead be willing to stick your neck out in some ways with an honest opinion that'll make you vulnerable to criticism and contrarianism, certainly, but it's better than just trying to follow the crowd in order to make a buck. That's pretty bland. That's not all the people I know who go about it that way after 5 years or so, they want to stop because it's just not only is it boring, but it's sort of soul crushing to just be chasing trends in that sort of way.
It really is. And it's actually, yeah, sometimes I get people in my mentions saying, like, how can you like Y2K, this, or that? And I'm like, I just like the game. Where'd you get that opinion? Did a YouTuber give it to you?
That's right. And so often they haven't even played it. I would be shocked if people who love turn-based combat don't enjoy the new update at the very least. Like as you said, and I'm still coming to understand the Carta system, it's so delightfully confusing at the beginning. And I've been playing turn-based RPGs since, the early 80s. This one threw me off, and I didn't feel like I could just fall on my old turn-based skills and my old turn-based strategies in order to win. And also, just like how the game throws you off with narrative twists and surrealism that you don't know how to interpret at first, if you decide to like chew on it and figure it out, you can come to some incredible realizations and really see yourself progress as a thinker in terms of how to win at the game. So, at the very least, I implore people who love turn-based combat to give the game a try. I'm pretty sure there's a free demo, or is that gone now? There was a
Yes.
demo
I
for a
think
little
the
bit.
Nameless Psychosis demo is still around.
Oh, good.
It's
And that's
like,
on Steam, I think.
yeah, but I don't, can I like say something about the Carta system? It reminds me a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh, where you've got the three cards that are protecting your life points, and then once those are gone, you can be attacked directly.
Yeah.
So that's like my take on it.
Thank
Gosh,
you for
there's so
summing
much that
it
I
up
wanted to
so
talk to you
short
about
quickly.
Y2K though. Like
Yeah.
I didn't even talk about like the three endings. Because you mentioned you were talking about multiple endings, and there are two endings that people have found, but there's a third ending that people have been speculating on since 2019. That there's an entire like dedicated section of the Discord dedicated to finding this ending. And it
Right,
is
because you can
so
find it through hacking, right? But you can't actually get
no,
it
you can't
through.
even find it through hacking. It is so like there are things people can data mine looking for it, but they can't find everything.
Wow.
Some of it includes like finding an invisible item that's got a less than 20 or less than 5% chance of appearing, naming your character Zelda, and finding a character in a space that you're normally not able to access. And that's as far as people have gotten. They know it's leading to the end of the game, but they don't know how to get to this third ending yet. There's the standard ending, which is what you get when you play through the game as intended. IV does change some things up. I will say that there is a new bit appended to the end of IV. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will say that there is a decision that you can make at the end, and I chose wrong the first time and had to fight the final boss all over again.
Hmm.
So answer no on the question after the final boss. That's all I'm going to say.
Or else something happens.
Or else you just miss out on some bonus content, you know?
Yeah, that's
Like,
right. If you're talking about what I think you're talking about, is it almost a comedy ending if you say yes?
No, if you say yes, it's just the game's over. It's just like, ah, okay. And then the game's just over.
I saw an
Whereas,
ending, and maybe again, just like the game, where in the game, for folks who hadn't picked up on it yet, the main characters go online and find something and wonder, is this real? Is this a hoax? Is this connected to them, or is this them just being weirdly fascinated with something that has nothing to do with them? And likewise, if you research Y2K the game, you'll find stuff you don't know if it's real or not because the graphic style is one people can emulate and make fake content for fairly easily. And it's hard to know unless you've really, really explored the game. And even then, as you were saying before, there's this third ending that may or may not be real, that is almost its own urban legend, like the urban legends they explore in the game. I saw an ending where Alex turns into a giant flaming meteor head and goes into space. Was that real?
that's not the ending. That's just part of the game.
Good to know. Okay, I wasn't sure because I have gotten pretty far into IV, but I haven't beaten it yet. And I think that the flaming meteor head is close to the end, or is that not even close yet?
Yeah, I would say it's close to the end.
Yeah, I have not quite gotten there yet, and have really enjoyed the time I've spent with it thus far. Is there more you wanted to say about the various endings and what they mean to what the game means in terms of a piece of story?
Yes. So I think Y2K as a whole, I just want to say, well, I'll talk about the endings and then talk about like my overall feelings about it.
Sounds good.
But as far as the endings go, there's the first ending, which pretty much everyone will see. Then there's the second ending, which is sort of an urban legendy sort of thing. It's sort of in the final sequence. You have to do a very obscure series of things. There's a section of the game where a character says, I'm not leaving my post unless it's the literal end of the world. And so if you come back to that place during the end of the world, you can actually explore it and come across another ending.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I think the ending is essentially, it's a different take, but so that's the second ending. I don't
Hmm.
want to get too spoiler territory in that one.
Hmm.
But the third ending is the one that people are obsessed with. The third ending is Andrew has confirmed that it's real.
Hmm.
And like people keep on finding more info about it. So it's become essentially an urban legend that people have to unravel. Like I said earlier, you have to name your character Zelda to see the ending. We know that so far. And the reason why is because number one, you have to go to this one obscure area of the game, go to a random corner, and there is a 1 in 20 chance that there's an item there that you pick up that doesn't even go into your inventory. Yeah.
Wow.
And if it doesn't happen, you just keep on re-entering the area until it happens. Then you see a character, he says, I only talk to princesses. And that's the only hint that you have to name your character Zelda. He's like,
Hmm.
I only talk to princesses. You have to do something about your name if you want me to talk to you.
And you can't change your name after you start the game.
Right.
You get that one
You gotta
opportunity.
you gotta beat the game and go into New Game Plus.
Oh, that's right. And it is mysterious. They do some really direct callbacks to Earthbound in terms of like you not only name yourself, but you name things about your real life. And then as you play the game, you don't actually see any characters named after those characters, at least that you know of at first. So it takes a little while for the payoff on that. I realize we talked a little bit about why it's called Y2K. But people may not know that in the year 1999, everyone was terrified that because of a lack of forethought on the parts of computer programmers, they thought computers were all just going to stop working because they couldn't compute the year 2000 as existing. That it always just went up to 99, and after that, it would roll back to like nothing. And they thought planes were going to fall out of the sky, and that all computers would just stop working, and cars wouldn't work, and stuff like that. So there was this panic about the end of the world that kind of overarched that entire year, the year 2000, that they sort of talk about directly, but not really. I think for some folks they were a little disappointed. There's a new movie coming out called Y2K that's actually about that. It was starring like Not Seth Rogen, the little Seth Rogen, with more fun to him. What is his name? Do you know who I'm talking about? The little fake Seth
I
Rogen?
I don't actually.
I can see why, because that description wasn't the best. He was in a movie with Michael Cera, who people hated because he was in Scott Pilgrim. For a lot of the reasons they hate Y2K, it's all coming back together. But yeah, they didn't really talk about the overarching end of the world part of the game at the start. But towards the end of Y2K, there's definitely some direct conversation of the apocalypse.
Yep, they definitely talk about Y2K. They mention what the Y2K bug was. And there's actually an enemy, just like a random fodder enemy called the Millennium Bug, which I think is really fun.
Yeah.
So they definitely address Y2K, the disaster or the impending disaster in some parts of the game. Just you got to get a little further in.
Right, that's right. But it's not like that's the central premise of the game from the start. And what are your thoughts on the game overall at this point in your relationship with it? Do you feel like your relationship with this game is going to continue even after you've beaten the new version, or do you feel like that's it for you and Y2K? I think I know the answer to that already, but just wanted to pose it. And overall, your thoughts about the game at this point in time.
So I think when Y2K first came out, it was one of those games that I recommended as this is one of my favorite games ever. I don't think you'll enjoy it, but there is a lot of heart. There is a lot of really cool concepts buried under a lot of layers of sort of it's an ambitious game, right?
Hmm.
It's incredibly ambitious, but these were two guys who were on an indie budget trying to develop something that would change the world. There
Hmm.
are always limitations that come from indie development, and it suffered from those limitations. Um, so it had really great ideas. I thought that the original Y2K had amazing ideas, just couldn't be fully realized because of, scope, right?
Right.
And then Y2K 1.5 comes around and it I was kind of afraid of this game, honestly. I was kind of afraid that it would tarnish the original vision of the original. But no, instead it sort of expands on it. It feels like it's the game that ambitious game was trying to be.
Hmm.
They remade a bunch of cutscenes. They added new scenes. They revamped the battle system. It's no longer a game where I'm like, this is a game I really like. I don't know if I can recommend it. The battle system's kind of eh. There's some parts that might drag. Now I'm just like, this is one of my favorite games of all time. I strongly recommend it to anyone now. It's it's still a bit of an acquired taste for some folks. It's not an easy recommend, but it's a lot easier of a recommend than I would have said before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can tell
And
people if you like Persona and wouldn't mind it with more of a Western bent in terms of style and feel, you're sure to like the combat system and the overall sense of it. You can say that to people who like Undertale and Deltarune. You can say that to people who like Earthbound, going back to kind of the core quirky RPG starts back in the 90s. It's really a game you can full-throatedly tell people you're not going to like ironically enjoy this. It's just really good. And I think you'll like it if you like that sort of game. And if you only play Fortnite and Call of Duty and whatnot, maybe not. But if you're one of that 10% who are certainly enough people to keep a game successful and for it to sell a lot of copies and keep the developers in business. If you're part of that group that likes kind of weirder alternative games, I don't know if that's the term for them because you can't call them just indie anymore because indie is runs the gambit in terms of style and substance. But there's a kind of game that for me reminds me of 90s rock and roll. I don't know how old you are, Indy. I have the feeling you were born in the 90s. It's just a sense I get. Am I anywhere close there? Or do you not
yeah,
want to
you're
reveal
right.
your age? Is it a secret?
I am 20 to 40 years old and I always say I'm 20 to 30 something.
Yeah, that's a perfect age. So it was right around when you were born was when suddenly like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, like music that nobody thought would ever have a mainstream audience before, suddenly was the thing. And apropos, because Y2K has characters who listen to that kind of music because they're the age of that. They were probably teenagers when Nirvana was first popular. Uh, it very much feels like a game that's the game equivalent to that kind of music from forever ago, but modernized in a lot of ways. That's my take as an older person.
Oh, definitely. It actually reminds me, one thing that I find really interesting about this game is a lot of people will complain about things like a character having a oh, so fun fact, my wife runs a doggy daycare. So if you can hear dogs in the background, that's what's going on.
I love it.
Um, yeah. So, what was I saying? So the game is actually intentionally anachronistic because it's sort of intended to have sort of a dreamlike sense to it.
Hmm.
Like characters are talking about games that they played as a kid. Despite the fact that it takes place in 99, they're talking about, oh yeah, Chrono Trigger. I loved that when I was a kid. But things like
And
that.
I think you actually see like the boxes to Earthbound and Final Fantasy VII in Alex's room at some point. And I think Final Fantasy VII was only out for like 2 years or something along those lines when it had not been out for long. So, but he still talks about it as like one of his childhood favorites.
Yeah, it's a very intentional choice where it's meant to be anachronistic and sort of make you wonder if Alex is really a reliable narrator. And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing I love about the game is that Alex is a very bad narrator, and you're seeing things through his sort of distorted lens of nostalgia in a sense.
I was going to say that yet another series, and I know this is sort of hacky way to recommend things, but it tends to work. If you like this, you might like this. If you like the revamp of the Yakuza series, the Like a Dragon take on it, which is like a confused, sometimes psychotic lead character who thinks he's playing Dragon Quest as his life, because he always wanted to be a Dragon Quest hero. Again, if you haven't played Y2K, they kind of did some of that stuff before Yakuza did it, because Alex will experience completely bizarre things like fighting a giant rat or whatever, and not think anything of it, because when you're not fully in reality, things that are clearly hallucinations just feel normal to you. Like when you have a dream, something really bizarre and surreal can be happening in your dream, but in dream logic, it all makes sense. That's how Alex is. And then there's other times when he's seeing something just slightly weird and he completely freaks out over, I didn't do my mouth big enough. I was like, like what?
Ah,
That
you're geeking
guy's
out.
that's it's so amazing that and it is such a game for the modern era that so hard people came on and made fun of it. Just like so many people made fun of so many people that later just became genuinely adored internet celebrities. Like we're now in an era where if you can engage with people emotionally and make them feel good, even if you're making them feel good by giving them the opportunity to make fun of you, that feel good association will then lead to oxytocin release and trust and care. And then 5 years later, the YouTuber that you watched because they were so bad that you were making fun of them, it feels like your best friend to a lot of people. And I feel like that's where some people, I hope, have gotten to with Y2K. They maybe started off feeling like they were making fun of it, but now that they have gotten to know it, they can have like a sincere appreciation for it.
I think that's definitely where I'm at too. Like, I definitely went into it thinking like, haha, I'm gonna make fun of this bad game. I'm like, oh, this is actually really good. Um,
I love
I
that
don't,
that's
this
where
is
you.
kind of an aside,
Hmm.
but I caught myself humming a song from the game today, and my wife was like, "Oh no, not again." Because, back in 2019, I had the soundtrack on repeat in my car all the time. It has one of the best soundtracks of any video game I've ever played.
The soundtrack is great. And I remember Limited Run was going to release the game, and people were, anticipating that it must be a great game. And then the reviews were not so great. And then suddenly the game wasn't released by Limited Run, but they did release the vinyl soundtrack and it sold great. Like people,
Was it
I'm sorry, go
was it
ahead.
Limited Run or the Yeti?
I don't know, maybe both. The way
I think it was the
they
Yeti.
work. limited run, as far as I know, they will do like a limited run and then they'll set you free. Like I've done some writing for limited run, and I know people have their complaints about the company. I'm not like endorsing the company necessarily, but I'll tell you that after you write for them, they just say you can take everything you wrote and publish it somewhere else and get paid again. We don't care because we did a limited run of your writing. Nobody can buy the No More Heroes book that you wrote for anymore. And that kind of sucks. Like, we don't want your writing to have to be lost to time. So, sure, go ahead, talk to somebody else about republishing it and get paid twice for the same thing. Like, on that end, they are very kind to people and really human. So, I can say that much about them. But I'm tangenting Indy, and I have to go. It's actually my birthday today. So,
Oh,
happy
happy
birthday to me.
birthday.
Yeah, thank you. I'm 48. I'm old enough to be Alex's dad, I think, who you meet later in the game. Spoilers, everybody. And I look a little bit like Alex's dad today, missing the hair, of course. So I have to go do birthday fun. And Indy, you were such a wonderful person to talk to on my birthday about a game that literally no one else will talk to me about. I've tried,
I'm not
and I
even done
haven't
talking
gotten
to you about this. Like I got so much more I could say.
I love that. I want to give you the opportunity to say it and also invite you back on the show at a future date. But is there any more you want to say right now off the top of your head about this Y2K?
So just on the soundtrack tangent,
Yeah.
number one, Y2K 1.5 doubles the length of the soundtrack, and a lot of the tracks are like as good, if not better.
Mm.
Um, I want to say that the actual like vinyl soundtrack that I think the Yeti or Limited Run released is a weapon that you can use in the game, which I find incredibly wild.
Uh-huh.
Um, Down to like the like pink and black marbling. I have the physical record. It's super cool.
Awesome.
Um, and I want to say thank you for letting me talk about this because, like, again, I could still keep talking about this for hours I really like this game. I really like this game.
I really
Um,
like that you like this game, and I'm hoping this is not the end of Y2K. I'm hoping there's eventually a Y2K2, or however they're going to do the numbering for it, or maybe they'll go up to Y2K I.V. Who knows? But this will not be the last that we chat, and it was such a pleasure to have you on the show.
it was a pleasure being here. Oh, and I think you asked me earlier if I was still going to play after I've beaten it.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. I'm on New Game Plus Plus, and I'm still exploring it, finding new things, and it's an amazing game. It's great for theory crafters. It's got so much lore that needs to be uncovered, and I just love exploring and finding new things. It's so cool.
And I love that you're one of the pioneers getting in there, beating it before anyone else I know, and being someone to share it with the world. So thanks so much for doing that.
Of course. Thank you for having me on.
And so we will release Indie Alpaca back into the wild so that she might gather more insights from the world of video games. And if it is meant to be, she will return to us one day when we need her the most. Thanks, Indie.